Welcome back to Pop Goes the Stack, the podcast where emerging tech is put under a microscope. Sometimes a flamethrower. Depends. I'm Lori MacVittie, and I have my safety goggles on today. We're going to talk about a very interesting topic today. Why, Joel is here. Well, Joel's always here, but It's going to be interesting. So Joel's glad to be here, right?
Absolutely. Always glad to be here, Lori.
Awesome. Well, that's good, because today we're going to talk about apps leaking data. And that's interesting because AI touches lots of things today. Search, analytics, browsers, APIs, logs, whatever duct taped workflow somebody built at 2 a.m., right? So when people say it's just a chat, they're missing the point. That chat might actually pass through like half the stack and somebody else's, in a matter of moments. So recently, folks started finding pieces of AI conversations showing up where they should not be. There were prompts in search tooling, chat fragments in analytics, private suddenly became indexed, which none of us want. So, it wasn't because somebody hacked the system. It was because AI is so woven into everything. Integration is a 4-letter word. Anyone who's ever been tasked with doing integration of anything knows that. And now it's apparently one of the ways that AI is leaking our chat history, my special recipes all over the internet. Sad. So that's the new reality. So today we're going to talk about that. Privacy, compliance, why it's just a chat is the most dangerous sentence in AI. To do that, we brought Scott Hendrickson on, who knows something about SEO and stuff like that, right?
A little bit. I come from a background of data science, but working in marketing and SEO optimization for many years before joining F5. So I've seen a number of ways of doing these integrations and sharing data for marketing purposes come and go. And, this is the latest iteration of some of the challenges we're facing with, both compliance and with good intentions for what we do with users' data.
So let's start by exploring why SEO tools in particular are something that, if you're developing something that has a chatbot function in it, you might need to take a second look at your SEO. How are SEO tools typically integrated with an application?
So SEO tools, typically are integrated with the application primarily by sharing some of the information that the user inputs to make matches with ads on the internet, right? So that happens through a number of technical mechanisms that track the user from site to site or within a site, and then provide either contextual information about what the user is looking at or direct interaction with that site from the user in the form of keyword matches. And in the case of mistaking a chat box for not being integrated through SEO, an entire chat log might go into that context for how an ad would be matched to a user's behavior. So, sometimes we have a great experience with that. We're looking for a new desk, and desk ads pop up when we're, when we're searching the internet for a new desk. And sometimes we find that experience overly intrusive when personal information gets shared and indexed through an SEO integration.
Now, these SEO integrations are typically delivered by something like a tag manager, meaning it's not really a piece of the application. It's something you link into the application that gives it the ability to look at the transactions that are going on at the browser side. And so a lot of people forget SEO tools are there. They're not part of the application chain. They're not part of that path. They're usually hosted externally. And so people forget sometimes about the SEO tool. What happens if you forget about the SEO tool and you add new pieces to your application, like a chatbot?
Right. And so that kind of raises the issue of who's responsible for what. And in the case of a user who wants to take care of their own privacy, it's not always clear from the context they're interacting with an application or a website what's happening in terms of the sharing of data and what integrations exist there. I know with, various regulations in Europe and California, some of that disclosure has become required we have to tell people what some of those integrations look like and who's processing the data. Nonetheless, from a user perspective, it's quite complicated to dig through those lists and understand who's doing what. So the question you're raising sort of goes a second layer, is that also the intention of the developer might not be fully represented by the next integration that comes along. So, as a developer, I was asked to integrate service XYZ. So I did that to the best of my ability, communicating the risks and benefits and sharing as much information as I could. And then later someone comes along and adds a chat interface. We're getting a new kind of information from the user that wasn't contemplated in the original integration. And there's no one there to say, hey, wait a minute. We built this with these assumptions in mind, not the assumption of what you might type into a chat window.
Well, my understanding is, let's say I've got a chat open in GPT, and I've been talking with it about a number of things, some of which might be very personal, and I don't start a new conversation. I just keep going, and I'm like, oh, hey, I want to buy a TV, and it gives me a link to, tvstore.com, and I click on it. The problem here is, like, we as users, I know, but a lot of users don't realize that when they click on that, all of that conversation before is context, and it gets carried along because that's how chatbots work. So tvstore.com just got my query and that entire chat history. And that's really, so now it's got all this information that has maybe, private things, maybe, who knows what I was talking about. None of your business. I'm not telling you. But it shouldn't be at tvstore.com. And now that's in the SEO system because it tracks, oh, this came from ChatGPT and here was all this information. And then it's in the logs, and suddenly this private information is being stored in places it was never meant to be. So I'm not sure we can educate users to say, hey, never, do we have to do the phishing, style, campaigns? Hey, never click on a link. I mean, that's the point, is to click on a link and make it easy. What do we do? No answer. Look at that.
I
we don't know.
Laura, you make a good point. I think that one thing that we're facing right now is there's a transition underway that most people are used to using web applications in a transactional manner, meaning I go to this page, I look at this product, I may add it to a cart, I may delete it from the cart, I may look at a couple of other products, I may abandon the cart altogether. And that's what SEO tools are interested in. They're interested in the flow of transactions from a particular user and understanding if there are any patterns that may help make the application rise higher in the search rankings or fix user acceptance problems with the application itself by looking at the transactions. Now, the trouble is when you inject a chatbot interface into these systems that are transactional, then you're adding a layer of conversational interplay with a user. And conversations and transactions are similar, but a lot of times, because of the patterns that we're used to as humans in conversational interplay, we overshare in conversations. We do things towards those systems that might be patently unsafe. And so these things, because the system hasn't been configured in the SEO integration to tell the difference between a transactional element and a conversational element, it records both of them. And that means that those conversations become accessible to the people who also have access to the SEO transactional data, which means marketing teams, advertising organizations, search engine placement people, things that you convey conversationally may be accessed by a wider array of people than you thought possible. I think that's the real underlying problem here. People forget about an SEO integration, and then when it comes to putting a new functionality on your website that is conversational, it over records.
And I think, we're talking in the abstract here. And coming from the data science side, a lot of this SEO information that you're referring to, came through my teams as, aggregated information or black box processing of recommendation engines, or a number of data science models applied broadly to the set of data. So I wasn't literally sitting there reading through everyone's entries. However, we don't assume that's not possible, right? So
Right.
in the case, in the worst case we're talking about, the actual match of your context to the keywords in Google AdWords, for example, is explicitly shown to a human being. Like, you can see exactly what was typed into the box word
Mm-hmm.
for word. It's not protected in any way. And that's broadly available to any human who sets up Google AdWords as an advertiser. So, you could think, well, who cares in the abstract what I was talking about? Well, you're not wrong in terms of maybe the data science community. We don't care in the abstract. We're actually not reading all those things. We're just trying to make the matches that are most effective. However, there is no protection against someone reading that, who is in that lineup of how advertising works. And so it really is a personal disclosure of that exact information in many cases. It's not so abstract
Yeah.
in that world.
I mean, in the end analysis, I think people need to remember that when you go online, you are interacting with a website, and that's what you know. You know what you're giving to it, you know what you're receiving from it, but you're also wearing one of those clear backpacks like, you're used to going into Packers games with. And the clear backpack is accessible and it's visible to a lot of other people who you don't see that are behind your back. And it could include things like where you came from, the device you're using, tracking IDs, cookies that refuse to die. And now with these chatbot conversations being added to SEO tools, your AI conversations may be visible there as well. And so it's incumbent on everybody to remember the cost of oversharing and the fact that you're wearing that clear backpack on your back every time you go on the internet. Now, what can you do about that? Well, you can read the privacy statements on all the websites and make sure that what you are interacting with on the site has clearly defined guidelines about how they protect information. That's number one. Number two is you should look at possible regulations to make sure that this information isn't shared with advertisers. And I know that that's true in several states, and I know that is increasingly true overseas. But the cost of oversharing is really what we're talking about here.
Right. And there's a lot of user things. Like, I try not to overshare, right? I try to do these things. I do at least glance through privacy policies. You want to have a good idea of, hey, we're selling all your data. Well, that's a no. But the problem here that I see is that right now it was SEO that kind of made this, everybody aware of the problem. But as AI and we start seeing agents and they start, using tools, and people building web apps go, hey, I want, my product catalog and my ordering system to be tools, because distribution chains always adopt the new technology, right? So now you've got potentially all sorts of stuff in your clear backpack going through multiple chains, tools. Things are touching and seeing information that, for the most part, users are not aware of. If we went out and just asked like 5 people on the street, go ahead, Joel, you go downstairs in the top, just go ask like 5 people, like, how much of your conversation is shared when you click on a link. Most of them are not going to know. They don't understand the mechanism. So it's not just incumbent on companies providing the chatbots and building these things, and people to stop oversharing, but the people who might be receiving these kinds of links. Like, if you are a target for an agent or a chatbot or a search, you need to be aware that AI may be oversharing on behalf of users who have no idea. Okay. I'm not going to explain to grandma. She's not going to get it. Okay. It doesn't matter how many times I tell her. It's not going to happen. So we also need to be aware we might be receiving information we did not ask for, and maybe be a little bit more careful about that.
Yeah, and I think as users, we have some new cues to learn from the context. So when we're in the office around the water cooler telling stories, we pay attention to who's there and who's going to retell which story and how that word's going to travel, right? So we're careful about that based on social cues. We've kind of learned how to do this with search engines and email to some degree, but the context has changed. Now there's an opportunity to have what we assume to be an anonymous but fairly personal conversational style interaction around any kind of question we might have, it does lure all of us in to a different kind of conversation. Currently, there aren't useful social cues at all. So that information can go many places. And from the context of what you're doing, you may not get any indication of who's going to see this and how they're going to see it, in what context or in what detail. And so it is a change, both from the creator of app side, which I live in every day. How do we provide the right context to our users to be responsible for helping them make the best choices possible? And then as a user, sort of how do I get those contextual cues when they're not very obvious anymore?
I think it's also worthwhile to look at other integrations. I mean, we talked about SEO today, but honestly, SEO is just one of a class of tools that also has access to this information. There's also advertising or advertising governance systems, tag managers for various general purposes. There are embedded security tools that may also have access to the same information because they plug in at roughly the same side as an SEO. There's anti-bot tools, all sorts of things that have access to the same information. And so I think it's incumbent upon the people who do these integrations and operate those integrations to ask themselves three questions. Number one, what should we be collected to perform my job? Number two, what must never be shared? And number three, and most importantly, just because we can see something, should we? And then design the tool to bypass the information that you should never see. These SEO tools are super easy to drop in. These advertising plugins are super easy to drop in. And we think of them as just these little plugins that perform these functions for us. But what we fail to realize is these are integrations. These are things you integrate with an application, and every integration is a place for oversharing, security problems, potential challenges for loss of information. And so you need to talk about those as full integrations to the application and provide governance for them.
Yeah, I think I like that you're pounding on the integrations, because at some point we have to recognize that API calls are the way that integration happens today. It's not a toolkit and a team of people who are, building and tightly coupling things. Integration means I'm going to make an API call today, and I'm going to pass all sorts of information it needs to it, whether in the payload or in the headers or, on the actual URI. So we need to recognize that, and integration is necessary in order to build workflows and make things seamless. So it's a good thing, but we have to be more careful about all of that integration and what we're sharing. Part of this, I lay the blame on AI. The fact that it's statefully stateless. We'll talk about that some other time, but that really is a problem. It's inherent to the system, the way that it actually maintains state as context and then carries it along everywhere. So it's always going to be there. And how do we deal with that during integration? So we have to pay more attention to that and understand that mechanism, because it's different than the way that we used to do things. Scott, you got any, what advice would you give to, both, users, but also to enterprises dealing with this who receive, I don't know, clicks? What should they worry about?
Yeah, I think, I was thinking about the personal experience first, because I think, like each of you, I'm aware enough of what's happening behind the scenes to be very wary when I'm, sharing information, right? And so, I'm one of those people who uses an ad blocker. I'm one of those people who does clear the cache occasionally, pretty often actually. And I can really see a difference in my experience in applications when I do that. So I know it has an effect on those integrations. That's the part you can feel, right? But I also, probably like both of you, don't actually read the list of companies who are processing the data from site XYZ. I have a couple of times and realized I don't have time for this. And so that raises another question of scale. And I think, AI contributes to this too, is that of all the amazing things that have happened with AI, recently I've been I've been digging into multiple agent use and orchestration, and amazed at what we can accomplish after only 2 or 3 years of having worked with these things. It's really fun and wonderful. And at the same time, the opportunity for scaling sort of charismatic leading or misleading information has never been greater. And so as a user, I'm just thinking of how do you practically, read the signs and make great decisions in real time when you're trying to get 1,000 other things done at the same time. You do want to buy that new set of golf clubs, but you don't necessarily want to share your whole chat with the company who's selling those golf clubs. And so how do we do that? And I think, as a company, as a provider of applications, I really think it's important to provide as much efficient contextual information as possible up front, so that you can tell when you're typing in the wrong box, something that you don't want to share. I think, just those kinds of cues are like social cues. They're very efficient, they're very fast, and they keep people making better decisions based on the cues. That can't be the only answer, right? We also need to have the regulations keep up with the capabilities of the system. We're just in a different world in terms of how much you can scale a personalized, charismatic conversation to your own wishes. We've never been able to do that at the scale and efficiency that we can do it today. Yeah. And so that raises new challenge for how you regulate and how you do things, right? I think, it's been a wave of these things so fast with social media, with mass surveillance. Who cares if I'm on a camera on Main Street? Well, it's no big deal if it's one camera, but when it becomes a coherent set of cameras that can tell a story about your life, it starts to feel much more invasive, right? So it's the coherence of that starts to be really invasive, not necessarily the camera. So we're in a very similar situation now where we're starting to share a different kind of information about the story of our life in a very natural way. And it's a little hard to tell where that's going to end up and who's going to see the integrated story.
I'm going to go live off grid. You want to come with me? That's what I got out of that.
Lori, I guess my takeaway is that, like you said, regulation usually is what makes things change. And over time, SEO has been subject to lots of different pieces of regulation about privacy. And I think that we're probably going to have to redo that for the era of AI. SEO tools have tried to prevent oversharing because of regulations that related to privacy. And they've added tools like not collecting everything in every text box and masking things that it thinks might be a password, and to try to prevent people who shouldn't see that information from seeing it. And I think that that's probably going to have to happen for AI in earnest. But until that time happens, anybody who uses SEO tools should probably go take a peek and see if you are collecting things that you shouldn't be collecting and sharing. It only takes a quick peek into the logs of the SEO to make sure that that's not occurring.
Yeah, and I think that's important in the sense of like there are real life HIPAA regulations you are subject to. For example, if someone puts healthcare information into your SEO stream accidentally, and so there is some liability here already, even with regulation not having kept up with AI, at least in my opinion. And so I think being aware that there is some responsibility for the information users share with you already is a really important thing, and you should review your data with that in mind already. I mean, that should be part of the process of running your business today.
Absolutely. I'd love to continue this, but we're out of time. So that is a wrap for Pop Goes the Stack. Smash subscribe before we set something else ablaze. Safety goggles are now off. Until next time.